Hello photography fans, and welcome to another episode about classic cameras and classic photo gear. In today's episode, we're going to be discussing another really cool classic camera. I would say this is as classic as it gets. Okay, this is the beginning of photography, or at least somewhat the beginning of photography. So let me bring it in so you can check it out. Here it is, ladies and gentlemen. This is a Century 8x10 camera. This camera, believe it or not, came to me for the price of one good bottle of vodka, which is about $30. You don't believe it? Well, it only cost that much because it came in rather distressed condition. The person that sold me the particular camera brought it in pieces, and everything was there except for the bellows, or partial bellows were there, and all the bits and pieces were basically apart. I believe somebody tried to refurbish the camera, or they tried to do something with it. Well, without thinking much, what I did, I took the bellows, and obviously they were ripped, they were torn, and they were probably the original bellows. So I went ahead and ordered one out, and I ordered it from the Chinese person that sells on eBay. They charge really reasonable fee for making nice 8x10 bellows, as you can see. And all I did is packed up the old ones, or the partial of it. I took some measurements and I sent it off to the guy. Basically a month later, I get the bellows back, and they're superb quality. This camera also came with a really cool lens. It's a French lens, and I can't pronounce its name probably correctly, so I'm gonna try it. It's Hermagus, Hermagie. I can't even say that correctly. But let me, as you can see, this is the lens, so let me tilt the camera, you can check it out. It's about 15-inch lens, so 310mm lens. And it's a brass lens, 4-element, so it's almost petzval-like lens. And it used to have what they called Watergate. I think it was Watergate stops. Basically, it was like a little lollipop, and you would just pop it in the hole in a slot, and it will give you various f-stops. In its native states, the lens is f8 at 15 inches. The camera itself is made out of cherry, so it's mostly cherry, I believe. There's parts of it that are probably pine or some other wood, but I didn't really dig into this that much. I know the bed itself, the rails are cherry, and it's got brass fittings on brass tracks, so it's really neat. I started playing with it when I got it, just to check if all the movements are working, and they are working really nicely. The only problem that this camera had, besides the bellows, was that the mounting plate for the tripod was pretty much non-existent. So what I did, I took a piece of stainless steel plate, about 3 by 1.5 inches. I put a nutsert 1/4-20 in it, and I used brass screws to attach it to the underneath, and I'll show you that later. Everything else worked fine. The back side, the focusing glass, is in a good condition. However, the mounting screws for the glass itself, they were a little too long, I guess, and they would protrude to the other end. So when you try to slide in the cassette with film, it would actually gouge the cassette. The cassette is a wooden piece, so it would get really messed up. Speaking of cassette, speaking of the film holder, the original that came with this camera, which is wood, got distorted. So on top of it, you have a giant light leak. I tried to press the wood between two heavy pieces just to straighten it up, but it just didn't work. So I ended up getting one of these 8x10 holder. These are Fidelity, and I just got one. They're pretty pricey. I guess anything beyond 5x7 or 4x6 becomes pricey. Let's take a look at a lens one more time. Let me remove it. Basically, you just push it out. There's a spring-loaded. There's a spring there, and you just push it, and you pick it off like that. So as you can see, it's a decent-sized lens, and these are the Watergate stops. There's a slot for that. I don't have them. I'm planning on making maybe one. This is f8, maybe f11, just to stop it down a little bit. The camera did come with a shutter, with one of these pneumatic releases, but I didn't put it on. I have it somewhere in my closet. I just didn't mess with it. The main purpose I'm going to use this camera for is to take 8x10 paper negatives and then do contact printing either on salt print or salt paper or on another photo paper, and try to get positives from that. I did a test on my daughter's pony, plastic horse, and that worked out fine. However, I just did a couple more tests today with my kid, and with this, I had this light coming, northern light coming through a rather decent sized window. The exposure on paper was about 12 seconds at f8, so it's a fully open lens, and ISO 3 was what I originally calculated doing my other previous testing on paper. So 12 seconds. At one point I had to add zero filter just to remove some of that blue UV light, because paper is extremely sensitive to that and creates contrasting negatives, and I didn't like that. I want neutral negatives. The only pretty much way to obtain them is to use 500 watt studio constant light, or in case of natural light, which I prefer, would be to use zero filter. And if you use zero filter, you kind of have to compensate by one stop. Then you compensate for the bellows, and you're looking at 20-second exposures, which is not bad if you're taking a picture of a plastic horse. But if you're taking a picture of a kid with tons of energy, you're pretty much going for failure. But I did testing, and it worked out fine. So I know the lens is not leaking, the camera's not leaking anywhere, and that's a good thing. Another interesting thing about this camera, it came with the extension, bad extension. So that what that means is I can pretty much, if I rack it out all the way, I get almost double the Bellows extension. So this is my infinity, which is about here, or maybe here, and I get almost double extension on the front rack, but if I turn this thing around, and I add this piece, my camera can go back almost 4 times the extension. So that means I can take really close-up pictures of pretty much anything. Of course, you have to compensate a lot for the bellows, but hey, if you gotta do it, you have that option. There's a nifty lock in the back of the camera. Which is here. And what this does, it releases a little latch that holds the camera in this particular position. So if you want to extend the back on the extension rack, you just release this piece and you turn the knobs to move the whole rear standard. This is basically a giant or a large version of any 4x4, 4x5 camera. It's old. I don't know how old. I'm thinking maybe 70, 80, maybe even 90 years. It works great. I will show you my test result at the end of this video, but I just wanted to share this with you so you can see my newest acquisition. I recently got back in my film shooting, which was kind of stopped at one point where I did a little traveling. I shot mostly digital, but I went back and shot a couple rolls of film. It was mainly street scenes downtown Chicago. So I just processed that film. I shot it on my 1940s, late 1940s Rolleiflex Automat. And what's funny about that is, as I was walking the street, I see this guy with this nifty Leica M9. I'm thinking, wow, this guy has some serious dough. So I go up to him, I go, hey Mr. Leica, how do you like your camera? Immediately, basically, without even looking at me too long, he goes, oh, Mr. Rolleiflex, how's your camera? I go, yeah, mine is great, how is yours? So basically that's it. I mean, there's nothing to show on these old cameras. I mean, they're as simple as they can possibly get. Pretty much as simple as any box camera. It's the lens that matters, and it's the film that matters. And it's not the box itself. The box itself has very little to do with photography. Yeah, it does help you. It has tilt and shift. This one doesn't have front shift. It only has raise. So there's a little knob here. You just pull it out. That engages the track, and you just lift it up and you push it back in. And when you're done, when it comes to the rear standard, you got. Let me lift this up a little. You got your swing. Just have to loosen this. So you got your little swing here. And you got your tilt. To achieve the plane of focus that you need. I don't know if this is original part of the camera. I'm assuming it is. I don't know why they would have the whole thing stained cherry, and uh, partial base would be something else painted gray. I don't understand the reasoning behind this, but it's really cool nevertheless. There's a cool little stamp here. This is Century Camera, Rochester, New York. It's starting to fade. It's stamped on this brass piece here. Let's talk about the bellows for a second. When I got the camera for the bellows, like I said, the bellows were damaged. So I got the new set, and when it came in, I had to install it somehow. So I've had the front piece mounted by the guy who made the bellows, but the rear piece had to be attached to the rear standard. And I went ahead. The original one was attached with these little tiny brads, and I couldn't find them anywhere. So I'm thinking, what better way to attach this thing than to use either brass screws or brass nails. I searched high and low. Finally, at the hobby store, they had little packets of brass screws and brass nails. So I bought both, 100 each, 100 pieces in each bag for $1.50. So I bought one of each, and I brought them home, and I started messing with little screws. The screws were really finicky to install, and you had to puncture a hole. The bellows are really rigid. So I just opted for the screws for the nails. So I started nailing this around. When I was done, I noticed the corners were leaking a little light. So I went ahead and used black silicone sealant or rubber, and I just sealed the corners. So now if you want to remove it, basically can't remove it without damaging the bellows. But I guess if the bellows aren't going to be exchanged, then who cares if they're damaged? So that's it. That's it about this camera. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed this short overview of this Century 8x10 camera. Classic beauty. This camera is as classic as you can find them. It may not feature the features that more expensive cameras, Deardorff or other ones have out there, like the front swing and more shift, more tilt. But for the intended purpose, for what I'm going to use this camera for, what this camera offers is plenty enough. And for $30, how can you go wrong for $30? It's just beyond me. You just can't go wrong. So even with little investment for the bellows, it's still well worth it. I'm actually out of room in my closet here, so it doesn't have its own bag. It sits in between other bags. But I will make sure that it will get some usage when I get to it. So that's it, photography fans. Keep shooting film. Keep the film alive.
Tiptoe to the window, by the window, that is where I'll become. Tiptoe through the tulips with me. Tiptoe from your pillow to the shadow of a willow tree, and tiptoe through the tulips with me.